the positioning and reputation management of a very important industry sector like yours. Everybody eats eggs, everybody eats chicken, they eat them more and more. There was a very interesting statistic earlier that there's been an increase of 50-fold in the demand for eggs in this country. That just shows the importance of this sector. And we believe that a lot needs to be done to ensure that you get the kind of prominence that you require as an industry, but there are, of course, things to be done. I just wanted to do a kind of a quick check from a communications point of view when we are talking about the move to the digital world and social media, which basically from where we derive a lot of our information and also get influenced. I just wanted, can you have a show of hands of the people who actually use Facebook? All right. WhatsApp? Okay, that's nice. How many of you are on Twitter? How many of you go to YouTube regularly? And how many of you actually go on Instagram and watch some funky reels morning to evening and just before you go to bed? Right. So the interesting part of this conversation is, where are you getting your information from? Who is it that is influencing you? Who is it out there talking about your industry and the pain points of your sector, and the influencers who could make a difference from an advantage point of view for your sector? We are all consuming. Okay, just one more question. How many of you read newspapers? Oh, there's a substantial number which still do, which is nice. Have you realized that newspapers have shrunk? सब पतले हो गए हैं. हाँ? जो 36 पेज का अखबार था वो 14 पेज का हो गया है. In a newspaper, a typical ratio between advertisement and news is 70-30. So 70% is news and 30% is, 70% is advertising and 30% is news. Which means अगर 14 पेज का अखबार है, तो 30% is news, 70% is advertising. Which means what you're getting to read is a very small percentage of the news you got in the newspaper earlier. This is where the digital world has taken over completely. All of you are consuming news on your phones through the various apps. All of you are consuming information and content from social media handles that you have. And that makes it very critical to understand, just taking over from what Srinivas was talking about. He focused mostly on the marketing side, the product side, and the sales side. But from a reputation point of view, from an influencer point of view, from a content point of view, that is where the brand and reputation bit comes up. So this is a very interesting thing that we talk in our business. And when I made the transition from being a newspaper editor to communications, the one thing I realized, interestingly, was that journalists are mostly the last one to know what's happening in the world. Do they claim, despite the fact that they claim that they are the first, right? Nothing against them. I was one for 27 years. I lived across countries, worked on some of the biggest stories in the world, wrote edits. As editor of Hindustan Times and editor of Khalij Times in Dubai, I actually led the news operations, 400 journalists, etc. But once I moved across, I realized journalists don't know. Journalists get to know only what is told to them. And this is where the whole influencer part comes into play. So let me just read this out as you read it along with me. An industry's reputation is an intangible asset that can have profound implication on the success of the business of the industry. No other intangible asset is at a greater risk than reputation. We don't realize. Most of us are very busy working our businesses. We are looking at our sales numbers, we are looking at ROIs, we are looking at profitability, we are looking at raw material cost, we are looking at logistics. We are unaware of the fact that there is an environment outside which looks at your business in a certain way. You have no idea what's happening. And that's why I think a lot of you were surprised when during COVID suddenly this whole stream started that COVID is being spread by eggs. But by the time you woke up and you realized what was happening, the damage had been done. All of you must have suffered losses because of that one particular bit of news until probably the government came in and set things right and said, that's not the case. But that gap in between the time where this information went out and started impacting your business to the point where action was taken to ensure that things got back to normal, but over a period of time, not immediately, it meant a financial loss for you. And reputation is something, and any impact on reputation can lead to grave losses, grave financial losses. And how do you manage that? For that you have to understand that, which is I'm going to read the last sentence, it therefore requires fortification with every single thought, action and deed. You have to be aware all the time in today's world. When we live in this world of social media and digital, nothing gets erased. Everything stays there. What you say, what you do, sometimes what you think because you express yourself. Right? It's very easy to go out and tweet and walk away. But that can damage your business. Right? Just think of what happened to Maggie, happened some years ago. Where did they lose the plot? A company like Maggie didn't realize that they were being hit hard on social media. Today, a reputation is even more important because of the state of the media, what I was talking about you earlier. And especially post-COVID, the media industry in terms of resourcing has shrunk. Newsrooms have shrunk. There are far fewer journalists working in a television newsroom or a newspaper newsroom than before. Which means everybody is under pressure. Which also means most of them are not going out of their office, or very few are. Which means that they are getting the information from either, in case of television, competing channels, or they're getting information from the social media handles of various people and then turning them into news and discussions and then go boom, 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 boom. Right? Before you realize you're sitting in the 9 o'clock mainline news with probably 15 people hanging out of little windows on the screen, shouting at each other. Nobody understands what they're doing or what they're saying. They're screaming and shouting, but at the end of the day, there is something that's scrolling down below, and people are digesting that. And what that is scrolling below is something, if you don't focus on, you lose touch with reality. And that is why it is important to fortify yourself. We have talked about this. But how many of you are actually talking about it, is my question. How many of you are going out there and saying, as an industry, this industry matters. It provides jobs. It impacts the economy positively. It is something that makes us self-sufficient. In the whole scheme of things, how we as a country are looking at making ourselves self-sufficient, it is something that creates economic positivity. As an industry, are you saying it? Is the question. Maybe in your individual capacities you are, but I think in the overall scheme of things, there has to be a much larger, narrative out there which resonates not only with the consumers, but also with Mr. Basu. Right? He also needs to understand the ills of the industry. He also needs to understand from a government point of view where help can be provided, because it is not in the government's interest, probably, to see an industry such as the poultry suffer in any which way. So when you're making a contribution to the economy, and you're not talking about the story, you're missing out on the big plot. And that's exactly why we need to talk about the brand building, positioning, and reputation. Because these are tricky things that as you grow at an amazing rate of 12%, 13% a year, your story doesn't get lost in the din and the noise that you have around yourself. Very critical. Today you cannot be heard until you are standing on top of that table and doing a little dance and screaming and shouting, because everybody around you is shouting. If you sit quietly and you say, okay, I'm doing well, this is how I am, I'm growing at 12%, I'm making my money, nobody knows you. Nobody knows you. You are just probably an egg vendor or a poultry supplier in the neighborhood. Are you an industry? Are you something which is bigger than what it seems to people? And here India's growth story becomes paramount. And we have been hearing this in the previous sessions. We are an economy that is growing faster than many, many other economies. It is leading to all kinds of changes. The way we look at business, the way we do business, the way we consume, the way we buy, everything has undergone a huge metamorphosis, right? How we pay. How many of you were in a bank in the last 1 month? How many of you have actually gone to a bank in the last 1 month to do a transaction? I don't see any hands here, which means you're probably using UPI or you're using a credit card. But business continues. We are still buying stuff. We are still selling stuff, right? Your little vendor in the neighborhood who makes omelets and has like 15 trays of eggs in the morning is not taking cash. He's taking one little gibberish thing on a mobile phone, punch a few numbers, and he has money in the bank. Today, more people in this country have bank accounts than ever. Today, we are talking about selling our capacity of digitalization for public good to other countries. And that's a big narrative as part of India's G20 presidency that you will see open up after, in the next 1 year. It's one of the pillars, core pillars of the conversation. It is because the way we live, the way we think, the way we consume, the way we buy, the way we travel, the way we eat, what we eat, has gone through a complete change in the last decade or slightly more. And that is the reality. And that's the reality. Once we accept, we will also accept the fact that we need to be part of this growth story and make a bit of a din and say we are also an active contributor to this growth. Because it's important. Thought we'll talk a bit about the media trends, taking forward what I've been saying. There's some numbers here. Very interesting numbers. Srinivas has already spoken about the internet penetration, so I won't go on that. But you have 900 TV channels, 17,000 newspapers. The readership in English is plateauing. The readership in other Indian languages is growing, which means if you are in a certain part of the country, you have to be aware of the fact that that particular language which impacts your business is something that is more important now than it ever was. Right? You want to influence politics, you have to realize that many MPs today don't read English, don't speak English. And when people don't read and speak English, and they read and speak different languages, they also think in that different language. When you think in Hindi and when you think in English, you think differently. That is the reality. If you think in Tamil, you will think differently from where you think in Kannada. That is the reality. You may not realize it. A lot of people do not realize it because you don't think in many languages. At any given point in time, you're thinking in one language. This is where it becomes imperative where your messaging goes. How you put together your narrative, where you push it. And from from an industry's point of view, when you're talking about the messaging, who carries that message becomes extremely critical. let's talk about a few things here. I talked about content consumption. And I talked about how our life has changed in terms of what we have, what we consume. Now, if you look at these numbers, they tell you a very interesting story. What is it that people are doing in terms of their time? Online gaming, online banking payments, online classes, which became a hit after COVID, in the post-COVID world. Social networking, chatting, messaging, video calling. When we were growing up and we were away from the places where our parents were, हम लोग कहीं कॉलेज में पढ़ते थे, कहीं और काम करते थे. The only way we could connect with our family was inland letter, postcards. जब हम साल में 2 बार घर जाते थे, बहुत सारी बातें होती थी करने के लिए. You know, today our children are connected to us via WhatsApp video, via FaceTime. बाहर कहीं भी हो, 6 महीने बाद जब घर बच्चे आते हैं तो अभी सोचते हो यार कुछ बात करने को है ही नहीं, सब पता है, क्या पूछें, you know? क्या बात करें? Because you know, you are connected. And that connectivity is something that is critical because that connectivity allows information, news, content to travel so fast and so wide that you don't have control. WhatsApp पे आपके पास एक मैसेज आ रहा है. WhatsApp has finally put a control on mass mailers until you pay them. So at any point in time, you cannot send the same message to more than 5 people. But आपने 5 किया, 5 ने 5 किया, 5 ने 5 किया. Geometrical progression में, before you know, it has reached the entire hall. And you, all of you people will be coming from different parts of the country. But you will have the same information. And you will then start discussing that information. The other very interesting trend that's happening and will continue to happen is visual content is going to take precedence. It's already doing that. Will eventually take precedence over written content. आप लोग रील्स देखते हैं, फेसबुक पे आप लोग देखते हैं, यूट्यूब कंज्यूम करते हैं. Today, Meta, which owns Facebook, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram, has more hits every month, close to 7.5 billion hits every month than anything else. The other 3 social media platforms that really have big hits are Chinese, so we don't have access to them, and they all play the game in China, which is a big market. But when people are spending this amount of time, and this is not only an urban-centric thing, आप गाँव में जाइए, वहाँ पे भी यही हो रहा है. You know, you go to a, you know, if you are staying in Delhi, Bombay, if you are staying in a society, you go there, the security guard is not interested in you, he's interested in the video that he's watching. Right? Your driver who carries you from one point to the other and waits for you to finish your dinner and come out, वो गाड़ी में ऐसे करके सो नहीं रहा है, वो अपने phone पे video देख रहा है. And going back to the point what Srinivasan said, the cost of data is so cheap that it doesn't really matter. And it's only going to get cheaper. 5G is going to make it faster, which means if there is anything against you, it will travel all that much more faster and that much more wider before you can control it. So these were some of the headlines that we found, which doesn't make you, all of you, look very good, right? 7 reasons to cook eggs right now. चल गया. फोटो लगा दी किसी ने, 4 पॉइंटर बनाए, दौड़ गया. व्हाट्सएप पे दौड़ा, मैसेंजर पे दौड़ा, फेसबुक पे दौड़ा. You can't control it, right? Environmental cost of factory farmed meat, new chicken well-being law to be passed by Indian, you know, antibiotics. These are issues that impact your business. But do you have any control over managing them? Probably not, because you don't know. And that's why you need to fortify yourself. That's why you got to tell your story louder than the guys who are going to tell a story which is detrimental to your cause. Abhi aapko baith ke, abhi wo, after lunch there were those two Nagada players who came in to wake us up, right? That's what you got to do. I mean, you need to do exactly that to wake the world up. Until you do that, nobody is listening, right? Nobody is listening. And especially if you've had lunch, then you really got to be awake. So you need that Nagada to go bigger and bigger and bigger. Fake news, falsehood. India today is the place for fake news. You know, there are several deans of the WhatsApp university. There's only one university, there are zillions of deans who are sitting and rolling their stuff out. And all of us are consuming and getting very excited. Most of us don't even read before pressing forward. What is that doing? आप ये सोचिए कि आपके कंपनी के बारे में कोई व्हाट्सएप पे न्यूज़ आई है, आपने वो न्यूज़ देखी, आप उस टाइम पे अखबार पढ़ रहे हैं या भजन कर रहे हैं, कुछ कर रहे हैं, फोन बजा, टिंग, यू आर यूज्ड टू पिकिंग अप द फोन इवन बिफोर यू वेक अप फ्रॉम योर बेड, राइट? आपने फोन उठाया, अच्छा ये फॉरवर्ड कर दिया, फिर बाद में पढ़ा ये क्या था, या किसी ने आपको जवाब पूछा कि ये क्या भेज दिया भाई, ओ डिलीट करो डिलीट करो, कितने डिलीट करेंगे, नहीं कर सकते। वो कहते हैं ट्रेन हैज लेफ्ट द स्टेशन, या घोड़ा निकल गया, गया। सो हैव टू बी अवेयर ऑफ दैट। व्हाट आर द few things that, you know, and this is, we did some research and found these are the few things that you have to fortify yourself. These are the issues that can hit you, have already hit you in the past, and can hit you again. So the question to ask, since they hit you the last time, what is it that you have done to ensure they don't hit you again? I don't know, maybe as an industry you have taken some steps, you have identified risk areas, you have set up groups and committees to discuss it, find ways to deal with it, create your narratives, put the messages into right place, identified who the narratives have to be taken to, the messages have to be sent to. Maybe you've done that, I don't know. But the point is, if you have not, then it's time to do it. It's time to do it in a hurry. Globally, if you see the campaigns, some of the very interesting campaigns that have run, you know, positive. And when you talk about setting narratives of your business and industry, it has to be positive, right? I don't know how many of you followed the 1989 elections. One of the reasons, I mean, apart from Bofors and VP Singh and all that stuff, one of the reasons Rajiv Gandhi's Congress lost, because the election campaign was negative. It was so negative that people said, "Ye kya hai?" Negativity never works. Positivity, continued positivity, hammering of positivity will always help. People get very scared of things that appear on Twitter. अब तो पता नहीं Twitter कितने दिन रहेगा, Elon Musk ले जाएगा कहीं उसको, but Twitter पे आ गया, ठीक है, कितने दिन रहता है, कहाँ चल रहा है, कितनी देर चलेगा, all that has to be noted. So you need mechanisms to create those positive stories. You need mechanisms to monitor कहाँ क्या आ रहा है, कौन छप रहा है, कौन क्या कह रहा है. This is a whole big exercise. It's not something that, you know, there are large companies that have social media monitoring teams. 20-20, 25-25 लोग बैठे होते हैं. Ministries में भी बैठते हैं, right? कि कहीं गलत कुछ नहीं छप जाए. How do you ensure that nothing goes wrong? And for that you need to keep monitoring. And monitoring takes time. It needs effort. It needs resources, needs money. But what it does is, in the long run, it ensures that you are safe. And if anything is going wrong, gets caught. So you need one strong industry position. the positioning is very important. What is the industry about? What it does? What does it stand for? What does it signify? What is its contribution? What it will be contributing? Now, Chandra made a very interesting, I don't know, one of the people who preceded me made a very interesting point that do we know as an industry where do we want to be in 2025? Or where do we want to be in 2030? We are part of a national economic story where the Prime Minister says we are going to be we are aiming to be a developed world by 2047. 25 साल में हम developed economy हो जाएंगे. And the government is taking care of putting policies into place which will make that journey possible. 47 बहुत दूर है, हम में से कितने जिंदा रहेंगे पता नहीं. But the reality is that there is a direction that has been set and there is an understanding of the destination where we want to go. Do we have a destination for the industry by 2030? Do we want to be a $100 billion industry? And if we want to be, what is it that we want to do? Or what is it that we can do? Or what is it that we should be doing? All those questions become part of your... So, the idea is to understand where we stand. And once we know where we stand, then it becomes easier to chart that journey. If we are standing here, that's where we need to go. What is it we need to do? So, necessary to think a 360-degree kind of take a 360-degree kind of a view and say, okay. In one of my previous roles, I was managing the interests of a very large conglomerate, which had about 120 companies. In my role, every morning, I had a table on which there was a map of all companies. And every morning, I would plant a red or a green or a yellow flag, depending on which company was facing a crisis. So it's all communications and policy-related stuff. Which company needed help, which company was going to get into a crisis. Even the top management of that conglomerate did not have that full view. But I had to do that exercise every morning, see कहाँ आग लगी है, कहाँ लगने वाली है, कहाँ बुझानी है, कहाँ बुझ गई है, and take it to the board and tell them this is what it is. And basis that, then whole day strategies would be formed, what to do. But you need to have that view. As individual businesses, as an industry, whether at a regional level or at a national level, you need to have that view. But if you don't have that view, then you will always be surprised. And one of the most critical thing in business, and you all know it, is uncertainty. No business anywhere in the world wants any kind of uncertainty. Never. Because everybody is working to a plan. And if anything happens, like this Ukraine war happened, right? We might be in a recession. Have we as an industry thought whether we can benefit from that? Or we are going to be actually badly impacted? What is going to hit us? Right? Anticipate the future is what I'm talking about. We sit down and map scenarios for our clients. And we tell them, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. If this happens, this is what you got to do. If this happens, this is what you got to do. If this happens, you got to do nothing. It's also important to understand sometimes you don't need to do anything. But this is all part of the bigger plan that needs to come into play. Engaging with stakeholders. Who are your key stakeholders? Consumers, government, whoever there are. Your vendors, your suppliers, people who take your products out into the market, logistics. Everybody needs to know what's happening in the business, because if you are surprised, they are surprised too. So this is the kind of conversations that one need to have to make sure that you are prepared. So build a campaign. Build a campaign jointly. together for mutual benefit, for the benefit of this country, for the benefit of people you employ, for the benefit of your business, so that it grows. And for that, there are several ways of doing it. I've been sitting here since morning. I'll be honest, this is the first time I'm actually dealing so deeply with the poultry industry, right? I eat eggs, I enjoy chicken, I do all that. But to understand what the issues are, when I was preparing for this talk, we did some research. My colleague Anusha, who's with me, she did some research and we understood some of it. But in the first half of today, what I have seen, understood, absorbed, makes me very confident that you have extremely positive story to tell. Extremely positive story to tell. And that story needs to be told. Right? There are different ways. But the point is that there is enough information, enough knowledge between all of you to put together the right talking points and take those things out. Impact stories. I don't think people who matter beyond your industry know that 1/3 of the eggs in this country come from one state. It was a surprise to me. I thought eggs were everywhere. Right? Every village has eggs, every city has eggs. But to understand that 1/3 of the total production of 122 billion eggs that we have in this country every year, 30% of that come from Tamil Nadu. What's the story there? That must be a good, strong story. What it does to the local economy, what it does to people, what it does to businesses. And eventually, what is it doing to the country? Right? There are lots of interesting stories. The one very important thing to understand is that we as individuals, as human beings, love to talk about individuals and human beings. We all love to gossip. A good gossip is always great. Right? We want to know, पड़ोसी क्या कर रहा है? We want to know, ससुर जी क्या कर रहे हैं? चाचा क्या कर रहा है? We want to know what are people like us doing. And if there are good stories to tell about people like us, we can identify with those stories. And that is the most important part. So tell your story. Let's get, for example, let's get National Geographic to do a nice little documentary on India's egg industry. Take it global. Show it around. Let people see. You go to a local TV channel and say अंडे पे story कर दो, वो जब ही करेगा जब अंडे नहीं मिल रहे होंगे या अंडों से कोविड हो जाएगा. Because they have to fight for their eyeballs, unfortunately, which is perfectly fine. So, make it part of the India success story. Tell people what poultry industry is all about. कितनों को मालूम है? कितनों को मालूम है? Who knows how many different kind of chicken there are? My father was in the government and he was posted in Andaman Islands in 1950s. There was nothing there. There were lots of tribes and few people from the mainland who had been sent there to settle the place. My father was with the industries department. And he tells me the stories कि सब कुछ अंडे पे चलता था. I said, how does that work? He says, we had some chicken and it was all barter. So people would get fish, people would get coconut, people would get bananas, and we will give them eggs. Right? Now, that's a story that dates back 60 years, probably. Since then, the poultry industry in this country has made a huge journey. Who knows about it? All of you know about it because you are the poultry industry. Outside of this hall, if you go and ask somebody, do you know your egg comes from Tamil Nadu? He will give you this vacant, vague look and say, ये क्या है? ये क्या बोल रहा है? मेरा अंडा तो बेगम पेट से आया था. Right? Without realizing कि वहाँ probably Tamil Nadu से पहुँचा है. So storytelling becomes important. Listen to people, what they are saying, what they are thinking. That's part of your first step that you will do. Build on that. Measure how well the expectations can be met. put that data together and form the strategy. Once you know what you have to manage, you know how to manage it. That's important. Thank you. I hope it's been helpful. Open to questions as we go forward. Thank you again. Thank you for the opportunity.